I am really, truly pleased to have our moderator this afternoon, Mary Kramer, who is the publisher of Crain's Detroit. And I'm also pleased because she's one of our board members at the Skillman Foundation, and we're just so grateful for her leadership in the city of Detroit and the region. Thank you.
Okay. We have less than 45 minutes to have a discussion on education and the disruptors here on this panel. Just a couple of ground rules. We will be having a hard close at 12:55 because there is a very important press conference and announcement that the governor will be involved in right after this session, so you might want to hang around for that. And also, if you have a question for any of the panelists, there are cards on your table, and you can raise the card, and someone from the chamber will collect the card and get them to me. To start us off, Governor Snyder, would you offer us your perspective on this topic of education disruptor?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Mary, and I want to thank the Skillman Foundation for all their hard work. It's great they're doing this event, but Carol and Tanya, thank you for all the great efforts you've made, and it's not stopping. And I'm proud to be partnering with you on these kind of efforts. The other thing I would say is I don't know if I'd go with the word last frontier. Being a good nerd, I do have a Trekkie element, and I think we should view this as the voyage of the Starship Enterprise, that we're going off into brave new worlds and setting new directions for all of us, because that's what this is about our kids in the future. And a couple things, and I'm going to be very brief here because we have experts sitting up here, is a couple things. I'm going to talk about some things that you haven't heard about potentially. One of the first things about being on the forefront of disruption is changing the question. And it's exciting to see that when we talk about education now, and we still have much more work to do, the first words out of our mouth are now becoming, what do we need to do to get the students learning at least 1 year each and every year? That's a fundamental question, and that's a different question than I heard when I arrived in Lansing, which was, the question is we want money, we need to spend more. And I would emphasize to you that whenever we discuss education, one way we'll know we're finally succeeding is when every conversation starts with the kids and about student growth. So I would emphasize that. But beyond that, if you look at the whole spectrum, P20, prenatal through lifelong learning, is something we can embrace in Detroit. And that is the new paradigm. And we're doing it, and we're doing it at all levels. I'm not going to talk about the prenatal piece. There's more to come on that. But the early childhood piece is an outstanding opportunity. In Detroit, the vicinity has been a leader in that. Actually, I want to give credit to Ypsilanti for the Perry School, for High Scope, for helping lead the charge on defining what is preschool. And their great work, and that's showing up now thanks to a lot of the great work with Excellent Schools Detroit, embracing this as part of their philosophy. So I want to thank Dan and his team for that. Then you go forward and say, look at Detroit Public Schools. DPS is doing some fabulous things. Major improvements there in terms of helping kids actually learn. But one thing I want to give DPS credit for is they're going beyond the simple learning environment, which is very difficult environment, but they're talking about the whole neighborhood, about how to bring the neighborhood back by making the school the hub of a neighborhood. And that's something we need to clearly embrace. Now, the Educational Achievement Authority is just fabulous. If you look at educational philosophy, it is on the forefront. And I'm going to leave John the opportunity to talk about that because he's the expert. But to talk about the concept of student-centered learning, bringing technology in the classroom, flipping the classroom where the teacher now becomes that supportive coach and not the lecturer, bringing all those tools to bear, talking about levels and mastering levels instead of grades. That is at the forefront. And I think you're going to find that to be one of the great educational revolutions in the next 10 and 20 years in our country. And it's very exciting. Now I'm going to leave with one more piece to say, we need to keep going though as part of P20. And I'm going to mention two things. One you may not have ever heard of is something called MAT Squared, which is about career technical training, because that's a huge opportunity in our country. And I'm proud to say that's a concept we brought back on from a trade mission to Germany. And what is MAT Squared? It's Michigan Advanced Technician Training. And it's really an opportunity that's being kicked off with a number of German companies, with Henry Ford Community College, Oakland Community College, to say, here's a program, you apply, you get in the program, it's in mechatronics. I doubt if I took a poll, there are many mechatronic experts in this room. But that's the combination of mechanics and electronics. It's a 3-year program. Their school's paid for. They're going to get paid for working while they're in the program. And when they're done, they have a guaranteed job and a place to work for next couple of years at a minimum. Think about that. The other piece I'll leave you with is we did it in this year's budget. I'm really proud. First robotics was as an opportunity for our kids to learn about robots in high school and junior high and earlier schools. We lead the country in our state. We have 200 robotics teams out of about 2,000. 10% of those teams in the country are in Michigan. Well, I'm proud to say we got additional resources, and I want to see that go up by 100 teams as fast as we can. So those are the kind of innovations. We are on the frontier, an exciting frontier, not the last frontier, but the next frontier of helping our kids. So think about those things, and let's have a great discussion. Thank you.
Great. John, that's a good segue for you to talk a little bit about EAA. You've been in the news a lot lately. But for the folks who have not had the opportunity to visit an EAA school, these are schools that were put in the EAA as recently as just last fall, correct?
Last fall.
Okay, and so they are the worst performing schools in the city of Detroit, 15 schools. If we were to visit one of these schools, what would be the first thing that we would notice to set those schools apart from other schools we may have visited?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say to a number of people here who've certainly been supportive of the Educational Achievement Authority of Michigan since we rolled it out. You've been really supportive, and we appreciate your assistance and your help. It's work that we certainly couldn't have done by ourselves, and we really appreciate it. In terms of what you see when you walk into an EAA school, and Tanya's right, we're certainly pushing the envelope, we're changing the paradigm, and we have our disruption to traditional public schooling is intentional. We believe that the problems with public education, not only in the state of Michigan, but across the country, is that we have maintained a system that has been broken and it's no longer applicable to 21st century digital native young people. And so you wouldn't find in our schools traditional grade levels, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, so forth and so on. What you would see is teachers using a curriculum that's tightly aligned not only to Michigan model content standards, but to the Common Core and to international standards as well. Michelle Reed talked during the last session about the United States being competitive with our international counterparts. We can't be competitive with international counterparts if our teachers are not ensuring that young people are mastering those skills that would allow them to be competitive. You'll see young people working with individualized learning plans, progressing through instructional levels rather than traditional grade levels once they have mastered the requisite skills that they need to have to be successful at the next level, and their movement through these instructional levels is not predicated upon a system of time. We go to school for 9 months, we get promoted to the next grade. We go to school for 9 months, we get promoted to next grade. And we allow children to do this in this broken system year after year after year, and by the time they get to be seniors, we allow them to don their caps, put on their gowns, march down the aisle to the tune of pomp and circumstance. They walk across the stage, and we place in their hands a diploma that many of them can't even read. And that is absolutely positively criminal. Our system has changed that. And when you consider the fact that we just gave the third assessment for the Educational Achievement Authority, and 44% of our children have already experienced 2 years growth in reading, 12% experienced 1 year's growth. In the area of mathematics, we had 48% to achieve more than 2 years growth, and 17% of them achieved at least 1 year's growth. And so children are far better off than they were in a traditional system where the teacher stands in front of the classroom and lectures for a period of 60 minutes. So those are the exciting things that you would see going on in our schools. You would see active parents, and we're not nearly as close to where we should be, but parents are returning to the school, and they're also excited about the growth that they see their children are making.
Dan, we just heard about the lowest performing schools and a turnaround plan for those schools. The name of your nonprofit is Excellent Schools Detroit. Are there excellent schools in Detroit?
There are excellent schools in Detroit. One of the things that we do as an organization is we put out an annual scorecard on school performance. It actually is a rolling scorecard on school performance, so it gets updated every time new information becomes available. This July, for the first time, that we'll release that scorecard and assign a letter grade to every school that educates Detroit kids. Independent and private schools, EAA schools, DPS schools, charter schools, doesn't matter if you're educating Detroit students. You will be in this scorecard. In addition, we take the information from the state around grading the performance of early learning programs. So they have a 5-star system for the state that's known as Great Start to Quality. We take that information and put that in the scorecard as well, so that you have in one place a scorecard on the performance of early learning programs and K-12 programs that parents can use to navigate this new system. And I'm pleased to report, early data, we don't have all of the data in yet, so stay tuned and be patient and pay attention come July, but early indicators are that we've got a number of solid schools in Detroit. Yes, we do.
Okay. And one of the things that I remember from looking at past reports is that there are more elementary schools that exceed state test score averages, and then there are fewer and fewer schools as the older the child gets. So high schools are still one of the issues.
That is largely correct. Some of the challenge there has to do with the fact that we were just talking about early childhood, John and I, early childhood education before we came on. And if a student gets to kindergarten and they're already behind, they don't have the basic literacy and numeracy skills that you need in order to succeed in kindergarten, and if the work of catching them up is this much, right? And if that continues every grade thereafter, the gap gets larger, and that starts to show up in your school aggregated data by the time you get to high school. That having been said, we have some outstanding high schools in Detroit as well. So there are early signs of success. We are big believers in data, not in ideology. So we want to see the proof in the numbers. And I think John welcomes that and the governor welcomes that too. We all want to see proof in the numbers that our kids are learning better. And in large part, we're seeing some early signs that they are.
Tanya mentioned the focus of Skillman on high school graduation rates. And if you want to have a student be ready for college, ACT is generally the benchmark that you use. And I think it would be surprising to a lot of people how few students have the ACT score of what I consider to be college ready is 21. Is that? And how many? Give a guess or give us the data on the situation in Detroit with average ACT scores.
Well, so I can't tell you what the numbers are today, and you're going to stretch me to try and remember what they were a few years ago. But my recollection is that in reading the number of, and this was just a DPS number, so there's some caveats around this data, but based on national testing, a number of years ago, I think it was 2009, we were something like 11% of students in Detroit graduating high school were considered college ready in reading, and it was a lower number, maybe 2% in math. If you start to aggregate all of that and say, well, how many students total are college ready when you go to college in all subjects, the number is it's startlingly low. I mean, let's be clear. This is a civil rights issue, right? This is the civil rights issue of this generation. We're doing a horrible disservice not only to those kids who aren't being educated properly, but to all of us, considering all the talent that we're leaving on the bench and leaving behind in what needs to be a really talent-rich environment in order to be successful as a country in the world.
Let me just add to that and reinforce that statewide, we have it on our dashboard, and the number statewide, if you use the ACT in all subjects to say who's college ready, the numbers climbed to 17%. That's a travesty. That's an improvement. It was 15, 16%. And the other benchmark I use to give you a perspective on it, because sometimes people like to challenge that, to say, well, that can't be right. The other one I like to use is what percentage of kids going to community college have to take a remedial class before they're ready to take an entry-level class in community college? Because these are largely students that have a high school diploma. That percentage, if you look across Michigan, ranges about 60%. Need to take a remedial class before they're qualified to take an entry-level class. And to think they have a high school diploma. We need to do a better job.
John, getting back to the EAA, one of the points that I think Michelle Rhee made this, in earlier conversation I had with her this morning was that opponents of school reform are much better at using the media than the reformers themselves. I would say if you did a scan of the EAA stories in the last 6-8 weeks, there's been a kind of a drumbeat of stories in the traditional media about whether or not you filled out an application for the grant with proper information. There were loans from the DPS to get you started. Do you feel like you're ahead of the game here, or do you, how can you better tell the story of EAA and get out in front instead of other people defining what you're doing or not doing?
Good point. I think those of us in the EAA certainly would have to do a much better job in sharing the great and positive stories that are going on in the EAA, and the stories are certainly many and vast. Also, I think the best teller of the story of the successes that we've had in the Education Achievement Authority is the parents and the children themselves. Another thing I think we could do to really combat the negative and more often than not inaccurate information that's out there is have people come and invite them firsthand to see for themselves what's going on in the 15 schools that we have acquired, 12 of which are direct run.
Rick DeVore, who is very well known in this room as regional president for PNC, is passionate about education. He has visited at least 4 of your schools, I believe, and told me this morning that when he goes to a school visit, he talks to students and asks the same questions. What's different now from last year? And the response, in a large part, is that they don't feel like they're being pushed along and they're mastering things, they're learning, and that there's no fighting.
Right. One of the things that we've noticed as well is a huge change in the climate and the culture of our schools. I went into some of the schools last year prior to acquiring them into the EAA, just to kind of get a feel for what was going on. And I'll give you one school, for example, Brenda Scott Elementary School. I went into the front door and stood there and just absolutely turned around and walked out. I have never seen that level of disruption in any school. It was just total chaos. There has been a monumental change in student behavior, the manner in which teachers interact with children and parents, and the situation has gotten better. More often than not, when we talk about school transformation, we talk about fixing children. I'm of the mindset that there's nothing wrong with children. It's everything wrong with adults who are running the system. And so we have then worked really, really hard to change the structure, change the system, and change the environment in which teachers teach and children learn. And as a result of that, you see better behaved kids who are excited about the progress that they're making. And kids, regardless of their socioeconomic background or their zip code, they want to be successful in school. Kids want to do well. And given the environment and put them in the right situation, they will do well and they'll behave better. And that's what we're seeing.
Governor, the EAA was intended to initially to embrace the worst performing schools in Detroit, but the idea, the goal, I think, was to roll it out statewide. That legislation, what chances of passage this year to expand EAA, or are you willing to wait another year?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question, Mary, because there's an impression that the legislation is required to expand the EAA, and that's not required. See, that's one of the misnomers that's out there, the misinformation that's being spread, is actually the legislation, in fact, isn't required to expand the EAA. It could expand under prior legislation at any point with the state superintendent as part of a reform effort. So it's already there. In fact, the legislation, we had agreed at some point for several years to put a cap on it. So it's actually the opposite.
So will the state school superintendent, Mike Flanagan, expand the EAA this year for the fall of next year?
Not likely for this next year, because again, the way I view it is I think the EAA is doing an outstanding job, but it's a startup. To start up a new enterprise like this is a major undertaking, and so the way I view it is let the startup evolve, let it get going, and the goal of the EAA is not to be this all-encompassing district around the state. People have that impression too. It's to be a fairly limited number, and again, focus on the most persistently failing where there have no other options to really turn around these schools in a positive way. The most exciting part of the EAA is not the number of schools in it. It's the fact that it's this place of innovation, that's doing new methods and new models that I hope traditional districts will come to the EAA and say, we're going to start doing a number of the things they like that the EAA is doing. And longer term, what I hope happens is the EAA will have an opportunity to look at innovations in traditional districts across the state and say they're going to bring them to the EAA. So what we've really done, it shouldn't be about the number of schools. It should be about, here's a place of innovation and entrepreneurship focused on kids that have had the greatest struggle and had very little hope of having an education. And we're solving that problem now, because that's the part I like the relationship with DPS. DPS had these schools that were fundamentally failing. There was zero college ready in these schools, largely. And now there's an environment where
Nice.
DPS can focus on